Alright, so as I mentioned last week, I'm going to give you guys my origin story. So for me, it all started back in the 80s with my dad, who happened to be a pretty huge SpiderMan fan. I remember with him, I watched the old Batman shows from the 70s. I mean, I even remember a SpiderMan phone, house phone, you know. Back in those days, you know, there was no cell phone, so you had to, you know, have the phone service. You had a wired phone. You couldn't go so far, otherwise you're like, you know, stretching yourself, and it was crazy. But the SpiderMan phone, man, it was something else. It was Spider-Man climbing up a chimney, and I don't know, like, I feel like if I had that phone now, it would definitely be great to like display somewhere. You literally had a chimney with Spider-Man like climbing up the side, and it was, man, it was so cool. So yeah, so anyway, so my dad, we had those things in common, and you know, fast forward to the early 90s, because I think with my dad, that's kind of what planted the seed. And then go fast forward to the early 90s, my friend at the time, his name was Antonio, he was like the real first introduction, or he gave me my real first introduction to comic books, honestly. He always had comic books. He had he had stacks upon stacks, and like, it was crazy. And then, you know, at first I was like, you know, they're cool. But I felt like at the time reading was a nerdy thing and all that. So I was like, nah, you know. But finally, one day, I remember going over his house, and he's like, you know what? Check this out. And he hands me a SpiderMan book, which that helped me because I've already liked Spider-Man. So he hands me a SpiderMan book, and, you know, I started reading it. Man, I was just hooked. And I was like, hey, man, what else you got there? He had a couple Punisher. He had a lot of Marvel stuff. He had a lot of Batman and all that stuff too, but it just kind of turned into like a marathon almost. I mean, we sat there in his room and we read comics for probably a good 2-3 hours, just hanging out, reading books and talking about them. And from there, I was absolutely hooked. And then not a few years later after that, I remember the Spawn movie that came out. It was, I mean, at the time for me, I was like, man, this is freaking amazing. Spawn, you kidding? So, got into the Spawn books and all of that. But yeah, man, it was something amazing. Now, one thing to mention about the 90s is it was a completely different time than it is now. Now, the world of comic books and things like that are far more accepted. Not that it wasn't accepted back then, but what I mean by that is, you know, a large majority of people would be, if you were like, man, I'm reading comics, or I like comic books, whatever, you were looked at like a nerd, and you might get picked on and things like that. So beyond my friend Antonio, I never really shared much of my enjoyment for comics. Now, with my friend Antonio, we took it kind of to a whole different level. What we did was we would get together, and I remember in the early 90s, man, we had those Marvel like trading cards came out, and on the back of these cards and whatnot, they had like different attributes, like a 98 strength or whatever, like stamina, intelligence. And so that kind of got our wheels turning, and we got together, man, and we kind of came up with our own characters, our whole like universe, and I mean, it was crazy. I swear, we were really thinking we were gonna pitch these to like Marvel or DC, and like, man, we're gonna be blowing up. It never happened, obviously, but it was just a fun time, man. It was a fun time. But because of the stigma at the time, I never, like I said, I never really branched out and shared much with anybody. So yeah, I mean, I kind of kept it to myself. Even as the years went on through like the later high school years and early adult years, I ended up fading out of it. But you know, me and Antonio, we kind of, you know, through our families moving in different directions and whatever like that, we just kind of lost connection. And still to this day, I don't know, I haven't heard from him. I haven't spoken to him in probably like 20 something years. But yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for him, then I probably might not have ever enjoyed comics. And now we fast forward to the current day, because about December of last year is when I really kind of ended that 20-something year being absent from comics. You know, I became oblivious to all the comics. And I kind of kept up with a little bit of it through the MCU. Marvel started making movies. I thought that was amazing. But during that time, that was about as much as I kept up with anything. So yeah, so fast forward to about December of last year. I have a friend that I work with, and you know, he's a lot more into, well, at the time, he was definitely a lot more into comic books and that, you know, that world. And I showed him these, and you know, it kind of built from there. We went to Heroes together. Heroes aren't hard to find. And I was just like, wow, man, like that really got the blood flowing again, so to speak. And as my birthday's in January, so as a birthday gift, he also got me a Deadpool SpiderMan trade paperback. So yeah, man, I definitely took a liking. I started off slowly the first couple of months, but then it just progressively built up. But yeah, man, I'm fully dedicated to it again. And yeah, I mean, what can I say, man? I'm collecting Marvel, DC, indie stuff. Like, I'm back to, I got every single issue of Gunslinger Spawn and King Spawn right now. I mean, I'm just into it, man. And back when I was growing up and I was first into it, comic book shops like they are now, like especially like Heroes aren't hard to find. Comic book shops that I remember weren't really a thing back then like they are now. Not too much. And man, I'm so thankful for it, because I remember going to the corner store with my friend Antonio, and you know, they got the little metal spinner racks and you just buy books off of those. So that was kind of how we did it back in those days, man. We were kids, and back then too, you didn't really care about the condition of the books so much. You know, I mean, shoot, we would fold them things up and put it in our back pocket and keep it going. You know, like it's just kind of how it was. Now it's definitely much more of a collector's kind of world, just as much as from collecting them to read them. So yeah, I'm just happy. I'm building up my collection. I'm really building up my collection. And I've gotten to the point now where my wife, she's like, man, let's revamp my man cave and kind of turn it into a comic book room. So I'm kind of toying with that idea. Trying to come up with ideas on how I can do things in here. So, you know, I'm getting there. I'm a newbie again, sort of. All right, well, there you have it. That's my origin story. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video, share the video, comment. Please subscribe to the channel. I got a lot of things coming still. I got a lot of ideas still coming. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. And hey, catch you on the flip side.